Hey readers, I'm Danny.
And I'm Leandra, and we are not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading 1/3 of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will be in the description.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Not Reading for Content. This is our final discussion for The Games Gods Play by Abigail Owen, our third month out of 4 for the season of genre blends, and we will get into it. We have a lot to talk about, a lot to rehash, but first, just a few housekeeping things. Be sure to know that because this is our final episode for this book, the book that we're reading next is The Hitchcock Hotel. This is by Stephanie Wrobel, and it's for our horror mystery genre blend. I'm very excited for it. We're going to cross our fingers, but we're not going to say anything else until we actually get to our introduction hype episode for that title. And also, for those who are looking even further ahead, our second season is just around the corner, and that's going to be translations. Every single book is going to be translated from a different language. It's also going to feature a different genre. So, pick and choose, see what you're interested in. If you want to know those titles ahead of time, they will be in the description. All right, without further ado, let's get started with this episode. And like always, we're going to start with a bookish bite. My bookish bite this time around is going to be about chapters. So, long chapters, short chapters. Do we have a preference? Does it affect our enjoyment of the book? Danny, what do you think about chapters and how important they are?
I do think that if a book doesn't have chapters, I am less likely to read it.
Good point.
That's kind of like my line in the sand. I'm like, no, no, I need some breaks every once in a while. I do prefer shorter chapters. I'm okay with longer, and I honestly think too, it probably depends on whether or not I'm reading it physically versus reading it via audio or immersively reading it. If I'm reading something on audio, I notice chapter lengths less, I think. But it does also, chapters just give you a good place to stop, and stopping in the middle of a sentence, via audio is also really annoying. So I do think my preference tends to be with shorter chapters. I do, though, like it when authors vary the chapter lengths. I don't need them to be the same all the time, if that makes sense. I don't need them to all be 10 pages or to all be, you know, 20 pages. I'm okay with the chapters being more organic to the story. And so if a chapter needs to be longer because there's more events happening in a specific scene, go for it. I don't like when chapter breaks are put in, I think, just to give the reader a break versus like when there's no point. If we're in the same location with the same people, not changing POVs, why does there need to be a chapter break? That's my opinion. What about you?
Yeah, I am glad you brought up, because I didn't even think of this, the fact that there are books out there that simply don't have chapters. They just go on. Or what they'll do instead is have these like long, breaks in the passage, and you just know that the scene is over, but
Yeah.
it's not much longer. So I think it's very psychological. We
Yes.
want that finite end. And
Yes.
it is also an interesting concept to question when books have very uniform chapters. Every 20 pages, we have a new chapter. And it's a question of, are authors doing this, purposefully, or is it kind of this natural break in the story where that's part of the author's writing style? So that is really fascinating. I have been discouraged at times when chapters are too long, where more so I'm that person where, especially if I've got the physical book or even the audio, I'll peek to see like, okay, how long is the next chapter? And depending on how many pages or how many minutes in that audiobook, I'm like, "Ooh, I don't know if I have the like bandwidth to actually sit down and read this entire chapter in the sitting I have, so I'll just set the book down." A good example of that was actually like The Searcher and The Hunter. Both of those books are by Tana French. When I was hosting a book club that was featuring these books, the biggest thing that all of us were saying were, oh my gosh, these chapters are so long. like why are they so long? Even for if you were listening to the audiobook, like it would be an hour long for a chapter for one time speed. So depending on the type of listener you are, but still that's a bit intimidating compared to like
Yeah.
20 minutes or a 10-page, chapter. So yeah, I do find that I am influenced. I don't want the chapters to be too short though either, because then the question is what are we doing? Why are these scenes so choppy? What is the author trying to do? I also do I don't think I have any thoughts on chapter titles. Sometimes I think they're superfluous. A lot of times I don't even look at the title. Like when I'm reading, I just completely
Yeah.
skip it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I think that I have, enjoyed chapter titles in a couple of books that were funny or amusing,
Yes.
but if it's just to explain, like, where we are or, like, to give a synopsis of what we're going into, I don't know that I need it. I I guess the most common one for me and the one that I did appreciate or do appreciate, especially when I'm reading it on audio, are books that will introduce whose character, whose perspective you're in the mind of, because then it's just kind of a reminder that we're switching POVs, and that's why we have a chapter break. But yeah, I don't know that I've really paid attention or like that it would get stuck in my brain chapter titles that aren't amusing or super meaningful. Like most chapter titles, I feel like I could skip over.
Oh, I completely agree. And I'm glad you brought up humor because I think that is probably the few times where I enjoy a title because the author is being a bit cheeky.
Yes.
And like you said, there is the purpose of, especially if it's just to show difference of POVs. If we're juggling 4 or 5 characters, sometimes I will say I don't really get it when we are going from one chapter to the next and the character hasn't changed. Then I'm like, one, why did we even change to another chapter? Just stay with
Right.
this person for longer because then we don't necessarily need that switch up. It seems a bit odd to me, but I do think that titles can be more meaningful when they're in parts. So, the part one, part two, and then there's maybe it could be, maybe the timeline. Have
Yeah.
we jumped? Have we switched to a different like geographical location? Is the theme changing? Hence why we have a title for this part two, part three. But the chapters, because they're so ephemeral, because they usually aren't super long, it does feel as though it's almost like it's not something that's very impactful for my reading. The reason why I brought this up today is because having finished the book, Danny and I, at least, have officially read 111 chapters in a book that is 509 pages long. That is wild. When you do the math, it's what, 5 pages a chapter? It's quite a lot. And I do think it probably impacted our reading of this book and our like feelings of investment and being sucked in because not only did we have, over 100 chapters, every chapter had a title and it was a very choppy experience in my opinion.
I also don't think that the parts really had a purpose. Maybe I missed
No.
it. But, like, as we would get to a part and then we would change chapters because one of the things I noticed was that a lot of times when books have parts, they will start the chapter numbers over. So part 3 will start with chapter 1 in part 3, and that's
Mm.
not what happened here. We were just it was a continuous stream of chapters, and then they would say a part in, a random location. But I did not comprehend why the parts were where they were or what they separated for us.
Yeah, it just seems superfluous. I think it maybe is expected in the area of fantasy more so than romance, because with romances, you don't really, to my knowledge, you don't see parts because it doesn't seem necessary unless it's like an epic romance, I suppose. So it's definitely leaning into the structural expectations of fantasy, but that doesn't mean you necessarily need it. And then, yeah, the question is why aren't we starting over the chapters and what do these parts mean? What's the difference between part one and part two, part,
Right,
4 and 5? Because I don't think there was a big difference. It's not as though we were going through a different trial
right,
per part or something like that. I feel as though some of the parts, and honestly, it's tough to remember because so much happened. But I felt as though they weren't very distinct, where I would remember, oh, yes, this part had 2 trials, this part had 1 trial, or,
right.
or whatever the case is. Even obviously, between last chapter and this, or last section, so last week and this week, we went from part 5 opening to part 6, and they're really, the no change in timeline. It was the next morning after our two characters had a wild night in the like pools, and then we continued on. Nothing really happened. That was just a climactic moment, I suppose. And then they're like, okay, end of part 5 or end of part 6, whatever we were doing. And you're just like, okay, so why are we doing this? But anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's get to the summary and we can actually break down this book. So Danny, would you like to give us the summary?
Sure. So, as you said, we do start our pages for today in part 7. It's the morning after Hades and Lyra have their intimate moment, and things have changed with the relationship in the morning. Hades is treating her really badly, and she doesn't have any explanation. There's no conversation. He is essentially just treating her like a piece of furniture. Like there's no recognition, no emotional connection, and it's just straight facts of like what she needs to get ready for as far as the next trial. We also have the Athena's trial when they go. We have this really gruesome scene where all of the heads of the deceased people who have been involved in the crucible, this not only includes the champions who have died, but also the loved ones who have died. So Day's grandmother's head is displayed on a pike. And that's the scene that the champions get, prior to entering into this next trial, which is a maze. Prior to this trial, we did have the meetup of the champions where Lyra offered them a deal to allow her to win in order to make Boone a god and, be Hades' champion and allow Hades to be the ruler of the overworld. But her deal has been rejected. And so they are facing Athena's trial completely alone. She has no more allies, and she needs to win if she wants to inevitably get Boone to come back to life and become a god. And the trial itself is rather gruesome. We have lots of buggies that are walking around attacking people. Micah ends up winning. And so we have this thought for Lyra that she's failed her mission. She could no longer win enough of the trials to become, for Hades to become the ruler of the gods. But shortly after that happens, Dex ends up killing Micah because all day long with the Athena's trials, he's kind of seemed not himself, out of sorts. He kills Micah, ends up also trying to kill Lyra. And the entire time, Athena is like smiling upon the situation at hand. And Lyra doesn't take that too well. Calls her a monster in front of the entire arena full of people, gets taken away and put into a jail cell to await the next trial. So while she's in this jail cell, she does befriend the daemons and then ends up going to Zeus's trial, where they tell them that Zeus's trial actually counts for 3 wins. And so she does still have a chance of winning, decides that she's going to go for it. And then we pursue the trial from there and see who the winner is at the end of the book. So I would like to start with the beginning of these pages and start with Hades' treatment of Lyra right after their moment of time, their kind of agreement to give each other what they want. What were your initial reactions of what went down in that first scene?
Well, my initial reactions are a little bit different because we also end up getting more context in the end as to why he was acting the way he was. But I will say, initially, I'm just like, Lyra, he told you that this was going to be no strings attached. He can't give you anything. And I felt as though it reflected her inexperience. The fact that, she completely agrees to, yes, we can just have this physical relationship, maybe this one night, and we can go our separate ways. We can remain professional in our relationship and focus on the trials. And then immediately after, the next day, she's like, oh, maybe he's getting me breakfast. Maybe he's going to leave me a note. Maybe. And then none of it happens. And she's like aghast. And I'm just thinking, Lyra, what are you talking about? He, like, honestly, I know that Hades was being a jerk and could have been a bit more civil and more, like, if anything, just more attentive, like a normal mentor, you know?
Right.
But the fact that she is so aghast, I'm just like, that just reinforces how naive she was, that she had no experience going into this. And it's not reflected upon really at all that she's not in the wrong, but I'm just like, he literally told you. Like, this is
Yeah.
a horrible, and I still think it's a horrible, like, depiction that, like, he has good reason, because in the end we realize that some random oracle, by the way, told him that he needed to, like, be cold to her. And I was just like, okay, fine. Like, whatever. I feel like it excuses his, like, horrible behavior of her, because
Oh,
she's like,
yeah.
oh, that's why. Okay, fine. We can just stay in love with each other. And I'm just thinking, what a terrible depiction of, like, a romantic relationship where he has provided a reason for why he had to basically be a dick to her. And I didn't think it was executed very well. How about you?
I agree. I was frustrated with her because I was like, this is what you agreed to. Like this is, but I was very frustrated with the almost the messaging of the book because we have this moment where she agrees to no strings attached. She doesn't essentially the next day decides that she doesn't want no strings attached, which we already kind of knew going in, but whatever. She breaks their deal in, being hurt by his behavior. But then it ends up being like, oh, he does love you. And so I feel like there is in society, we have this depiction of women that women want to fix men. And I
Mm-hmm,
think
mm-hmm.
this lends to that. Like I can fix him. We can be attached, even though he told me no. I agree to this thing, but I'm gonna believe that he doesn't really, want what we agreed to. And then inevitably he doesn't want what they agreed to. And I'm like, that's not reality. Like I feel like that's really poor messaging for especially young women who are reading this. If it makes you feel like, okay, so if I get into a relationship with a guy, we decide no strings attached, but surely I know that he loves me. And then inevitably he will. No, that's not what will happen. So that part I was rather frustrated with because I feel like it definitely could have been handled better.
Plus, like, two things. One, his explanation is that he was doing it for her own good because she needed to do it for herself, not for him, which is just like, that's such a load of crap. To being like, I was, like, making you stronger. I was, like, making you self-reliant. And it's like, no, that's not how you should do that when you care about someone. How about trust me to be able to reason and not think blindly, because you're not, like, God's gift to the world, even though you are a god. I get it. But you know what I mean. Secondly, she's supposedly cursed. Why isn't that addressed? This isn't, like, one, I actually don't remember if she ever reflects on this, but when he's treating her poorly the next day, like, I wouldn't have been surprised if she just was like, well, I expected this because I can't be loved. So I don't really know why she reacted, that she was shocked he was acting this way, because we've been told throughout this entire book that she's cursed and no one can love her. So it's like, girl, you literally should not be shocked. You actually should have, like, that should have been the reason why you accepted everything the night before, because you knew that that was going to be the inevitable end. So I feel like it's really weird that she's surprised when she has never stopped harping over the fact that she supposedly can never be loved. So essentially, it's just more hypocrisy regarding this love curse that you and I never trusted actually existed.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Let's.
So we have this love curse that we've the entire time thought is a little fishy because she definitely has people who do care for her and love her. Maybe not in a romantic way, but they love her as a friend or an acquaintance, whatever. But we thought that it was fake because of that, and now we find out in Zeus's trial. So they go through these gates. The last gate that they have to get through has the sirens in it, and the sirens, call to you. You can't really ignore them, and they want to be loved by humans, and essentially they love humans to death. And turns out that that's why Hades chose Lyra, because she can't be loved, and so the sirens can't see her
Yeah, she's
or
literally
hear
invisible to
her.
them.
I was so baffled because I'm like, okay, I guess whatever. But I thought whenever they were introducing the sirens and like what the sirens do, the sirens want to be loved by humans. I don't
Mhm.
I don't think, I mean, they explained it how it was reciprocal and they loved humans, but I'm like, I kind of feel like the main purpose of that relationship is for them to be worshipped by humans, which has nothing to do with whether or not Lyra can be loved. But then to add on top of that, that Lyra was walking around talking to everybody and she couldn't be seen. And I'm like, they can't hear you either? Like, what does that have to do with love? So that was the reason that she was chosen. And also, if that's the reason she was chosen, why could Hades not tell her that?
Yeah, and this goes back to something I think you brought up last episode. These gods aren't supposed to know what the trials are. Why did he know there would be a trial with sirens?
Right.
You know, unless this is something that like maybe Zeus does the same trial every single time. And then I'm just thinking, why don't we have like historical references where we know what happened 100 years ago? You know, it
Yeah.
seems really weird that there is no reference to them even like researching past trials and saying, okay, well, this is what this god typically does, so that we're a bit more aware. It just shows a bit more like wherewithal and presence of mind saying, let's do research, where like they've all just entered willy-nilly, like very much so. And the gods always show that they have a little bit more foreknowledge, which of course makes it all very ridiculous too. And also the convenience of Zeus making his trial worth 3 trials. I also
Negates
wondered,
everything else. Like, why
yeah, it
does
makes
there need to be
everything
trials then?
pointless.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, why did they go through all the other trials when literally this one trial can make someone win?
Right.
What is
And
the
I
point
don't know
there?
if that was his decision because at that point, then, because Samuel is Zeus's champion, right? I
Yes.
think. And Samuel had already won one. So maybe Zeus changed the rules to allow Samuel to win. But I'm like, is that allowed? Because why would anyone else not just make, especially because they all tell their champions about their trials. So why not, Aphrodite, when day was up, just be like, okay, well, my trial's worth 4 points because my champion's gonna win or whatever, which
Right.
that didn't happen. But like I had it didn't make sense to me. Why is all of a sudden this last trial the one that's worth so many points?
Yeah, and no one really questioning it or just
Yeah.
acknowledging like this is Zeus being Zeus and, you know, kind of being a bit of a dictator among the other gods. And I will say, I thought the siren scene was going to go a different way because I still thought the curse wasn't real. And I was like, oh, this is where we're going to realize that Lyra isn't affected and she's invisible because she's not fully human. I was still so focused
Yes.
on her being a demigod. And so when
Yes,
they were
I
like,
had
oh,
that
we
thought.
can't see her, we're not being affected, like she's not being affected, I was like, okay. And also sirens, music, Lyra humming. I was like, it's all there. The entire recipe.
You're like, "It wrote the story for you."
Literally, Abigail Owen, where are you? Like you literally wrote it yourself. Just have it come to fruition. And instead, this is the epiphany that Lyra's like, oh, it's because I can't be loved. And I was like, dear God, oh my gosh, I was so mad. And it really, we've had this before, you and I, in many of our buddy reads, where we've come up with a better reason. We've come up with a better storyline. And of course, we're disappointed when the author makes it far more simplistic and
Yeah,
like far more predictable. We were thinking there was more hidden under the surface. And
yeah,
it's crazy how you get disappointed that the author was just like, no, I'm telling the truth. I'm just being honest with you. This is
yeah.
there's no reveal, there's no twist. And you're like, oh, that's okay, that's a choice.
And the siren scene was also where Lyra had the epiphany that Hades was treating her poorly because he wanted her to make the decision because he didn't want her to choose winning when everyone else would have to die. And so she was like, he's being mean to me, so I didn't make the choice for him. And I'm like, but you realized that. And so that negates his acting poorly to you. And also like I don't know. I feel like that's what you're thinking of in this moment. Sirens are killing your friends, and we're thinking of Hades and why he was mean to you this morning. Can we
Yeah.
not? Can we do I don't know. All of the trials, I still come back to the point that I made. None of the trials actually had anything to do with the humans outsmarting the gods. It all had to do with the relics they were given or some gift, or in this case, a curse that they were given years ago. And how would Zeus not realize that he had given someone a gift that would make them impervious to sirens? Like, I don't know. Just and, like, all of the gods are cheating at this point in time, and they all know it, but the daemons apparently only care about certain times that they cheat, and if someone can prove that they've cheated, it was a mess.
Yeah, and even, one, the abilities, as you mentioned, the fact that she like randomly, it's always very random where we're reminded she has a bunch of animals under her skin, like the tattoos and stuff, and she just uses them. Like the spiders were biting her and doing all this stuff, and I actually can't remember what was the animal tattoo that like talked to them and was like, "Oh, actually, if you don't kill them, they're chill."
It was a tarantula, and he, like,
Oh,
waved his
okay.
she let the panther go, and I think the fox go to try and
Mhm.
protect her, and then the tarantula is sitting on her skin like, "Let me out, let me out."
I can help. Oh gosh. So then yeah, so that all just seemed very convenient whenever she randomly used one of the animals. And also the inconsistency. I swear I keep getting frustrated when there's all this fear surrounding these very powerful beings that they, will snap at any moment, at any wrong word. And this we finally get it, and it's really actually not that big of a deal when she's calling Athena a monster and all of this stuff. And I'm like, you've literally been like, you've insulted Zeus. You've done like, you've actually talked trash to a bunch of other people. And now finally you call Athena a monster twice. Honestly, what? If I were her, I'd be like, you are a bug that I could squish. That does not impact me. But you know what I mean? It just seemed really odd and random. And then she's thrown into God jail, and it's actually the most casual thing. Like it's very relaxed. They play games with her, they give her food. They're just chilling with her like the entire time. And even Aphrodite gets to meet her, and there's this really weird scene where she pretends to have an orgasm so they can have a powwow, and I'm just like, what are we doing here? Like this is a vacation. We
Yes.
watched Lyra go on vacation. That's it.
I thought that was so bizarre, the whole jail scene, because Athena gets really pissed off, and there is even a reference to Medusa,
Mm.
and the fact that that was a punishment, like, and so Lyra was expecting something like that, and she's even told that Athena wants to throw her into, is it Tartan? Is that what they call the really bad level of Hades, the underworld?
I can't remember. So I'll trust you.
I think it's Tartan because, we also find out that that's where, Persephone is stuck, but
Yeah.
that's, like, the worst level of hell. That's the greatest amount of torture that they can have, and that's where Athena wants to throw her, and the Daemons convince her that, "Oh, no, we'll just put her in jail for a couple days." I'm like, "What?" And we just breezed over that, like, this is gonna be her punishment now, and you're like, how was Athena okay with this?"
Yeah.
If Yeah, and yeah. So I thought that was kind of odd, and it really, I think, maybe was a plot device for her to eventually have that conversation with Aphrodite about Persephone, which then it also wasn't addressed. Aphrodite promises her that she won't tell anybody, and then she immediately goes and tells Zeus. So I don't know. It is a series, so maybe in the next book they will be talking about why Aphrodite made that decision to tell Zeus. I thought that was very strange because she did say that she wasn't going to tell Demeter because she didn't want Demeter to create a war amongst the gods to try and get her daughter out of Tartan.
Can we also talk about that kind of climactic ending? One, okay, so she ends up. Yeah, I feel terrible. I literally finished this yesterday, and it's all a blur at this point. But so she end up becoming a god. She becomes a god herself. Lyra is suddenly a god, and I feel like that's really silly and weird. Boone becomes the new god of thieves and has this weird like smirk banter, like, you know, with Hermes, and it's like, haha, there's a new god of thieves around here. It's like, okay, fine. And you know, everything seems hunky-dory. And then we get this really very quick scene. It probably was in the epilogue when they are okay. It's all very summarized too. I feel as though this was a scene where it should have been like showed preparation, planning, what they were getting ready for. But they end up having Pandora's box as well. So Hades requests Pandora's box because he's going to use it to like open, you know, a door to get Persephone out. And it was so quickly described where they're like, okay, we're here waiting, open the door. And then suddenly Lyra sucked in, the door shut, and now she's talking to a man that looks like Hades and is obviously, you know, one of the Titans. And it's just, what did I just read? What are like what? All this happened, I swear, in a matter of probably, I mean, because if it's every 5 pages is a different chapter, probably in the matter of 10, 15 pages. I was like, this is wild, rapid ending.
Yeah, I thought it was odd, first off, that we didn't automatically know that Lyra won. So like like her and Hades are having this conversation because Hades saved her, which I also, if I backtrack to talk about that, Hades saved her by giving her his crown, which I thought would
Right.
kill him because then he's no longer a god. And so then he's immortal, right? Like those are the two options. You are either a god, or I guess you have a demigod, or an immortal, or you know, or a mortal. And if he gave her his or immortality, he would become mortal, which I guess doesn't mean that he's going to die. But anyway, I thought that was brushed over. That like
Maybe
he
it means that he gives her the crown. She's now the, you know, the ruler of the underworld. He remains a god. He's just simply not the ruler of the underworld anymore.
okay, I that part I was, which then why wouldn't you do that? Then it doesn't mean anything. Then there's no consequences for giving up your crown other than you don't have the ruling power, I guess, anymore, but you're still a god. Okay. So anyway, that happens. He saves her, brings her back to life. And then all of a sudden there's an assumption that she didn't win because she died. And so we go to the ceremony and the daemons were like, "Well, you were still mortal when you won, and because you won, you could have been healed even from death." There was this really long drawn out explanation as to why she then becomes the ruler of the overworld as well. Or no, the ruler of the underworld. Wait. She won, so shouldn't she be the ruler of the overworld?
I think she's the ruler of both.
I think Hades is the ruler of the overworld because his champion won.
Oh,
That's
so
I think what
maybe
happens.
so
So
he probably
she's
remains a king, but he's just the king of the overworld. She's the queen of the underworld.
yes. So that's what
Okay.
happens. And then because Hades doesn't hold both crowns, that's why he can't get Persephone out the original way, which is why he does ask for the Pandora's box. Um but yeah, the I also thought it was really brief, like the fact that they're opening Pandora's box and no one is prepared for her to get sucked through. I'm like, did we not know? You know, we knew the Titans were in, that it was a door to the Titans.
Yeah,
So
people
how
can go
was
both ways. That's how a
yeah,
door works.
right. So how is that not prepared for? I don't know. It was the ending was very quick. And especially for how drawn out the rest of the book was. This is a 500-page book. We spent so many pages on trials and everything, and the ending was just like, okay, now both of them are kings and they're going to change everything. Also, they're going to get rid of the crucible, and like there were all these things that were changing because Hades was now in control. The Boone scene that you mentioned, where Boone becomes a god and then takes the power from Demeter, or not Demeter, from Hermes, was really weird because he like points at Hermes and is like, ha ha, and then all of a sudden he has his power, and I'm like, what is happening? So yeah, I just thought it was very, very rushed, not detailed. None of it was explained, and we were just supposed to accept it.
Right. And this is an issue that I've seen with a lot of authors where, they have slower paced, maybe we're meandering. Maybe it just makes sense for the plot for it to be like slow and very, long, being chunky. That a lot of books, it's worth the chunkiness. It makes
Yeah.
sense. This one, was it worth the chunkiness? No. But we were here. We took, our time through it. And so it feels wild for an author to have, given your readers this certain type of pacing that goes for, 500 pages. And then the last 10 is so rapid. It's so rushed. And it's really jarring. And I don't really get why the author suddenly gets cold feet about drawing things out when they've done this the entire book. It happens time and time again. Not all books, but a lot of times, like, my disappointment is that for some reason they suddenly got cold feet and felt that they needed to, like what am I going to DNF it? Are you worried I'm going to DNF at page like 495? No, I like, try, like, it's fine. I'm here. So I always think it's very silly when an author rushes the ending, when it's like, also, it doesn't have to be that much longer. Just give us like,
Oh,
an extra 20, 30 pages, like take the final 50 pages to like give up, if you had to, whatever,
right.
depending on what you're doing. Because that also definitely needed planning. We needed to see that. And it definitely could have ended. You know what? This book could have ended with her becoming becoming the god of the underworld, Hades becoming the god of the overworld, him having this Pandora's box and then being like, okay, what are we doing? And then that's a jarring, crazy, being like, oh my gosh, what's he going to do with it? And then end scene. Next book can open with that, and maybe as it's, one of the developments is that she gets sucked in, and then
Yeah.
that can be part of the plot. It didn't have to be rushed at the very end of this book.
Right. We also did see a reference back to the preface, right? Where Zeus is like beating up um Lyra. So remember the very, very beginning, the very first thing we see is Zeus attacking Lyra. We
Mm-hmm.
got that, but that wasn't even the end. That was like right before Zeus gets taken by the daemons to be punished because he's cheated.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, why was that necessary for the preface too? Like I feel like there were so many things that weren't necessary that could have been taken out to allow if you only wanted your book to be 509 pages, I think that there were things that we could have taken out to allow for more room for the ending. But
Yeah, I agree. But alas, it's another book that we have finished in, this season of genre blends. I would argue that you and I are still trying to find our, perfect romantasy for us, even though we haven't provided our ratings yet. I do think that now is a good time for us to transition into our final 3 questions when it comes to our, reactions to the entire book. It doesn't have to be about this section, especially since we've officially finished the title. But Danny, what is your final rating for the book, or overall? And then what is your final, favorite character, either in this section or in the entirety of the book? And then will you continue the series? How about that?
I'll answer them in the reverse order.
Ooh, fun.
So, will I continue the series? No. I'm done. I don't need to know what happens next. If, someone in our booktube universe reads it, I might watch a video about, their thoughts on what happens in the second book, but I don't have any need to pick up where we left off and figure out how Lyra gets out of Tartan or whatever. And then my favorite character, I would say, I mean, Cerberus. Like he's the shining star of the book. I would read an entire book about his life and how he became who he became. We didn't talk about the fact that he has this really sad moment in the end where he is the one who's forced to attack Lyra and inevitably led to her. Well, he didn't lead to her death, but the scenes surrounding her death had him involved, and he was taken over, which was very sad that he was made he was manipulated to do that. But yeah, I think he would be my favorite character, or Karen. I would have liked, honestly, to see more of Karen's character and backstory and his thoughts on the underworld, but alas, we did not get to see that. And my rating. Oh, my rating. I'm juggling between a 1.75 and just a flat 2-star, because there were so many things that I think could have been done better, but it was such a quick read. This is my toggling between, like, am I mad enough to give it a 1.75? Or am I just disappointed and should give it a 2 because it was a quick read and it didn't take a lot of mental power for me to finish the book. But I think because of some of the expectations I had, some of the thoughts that we had on the curse and Felix never being addressed, there were so many elements that I feel like it was dangled in front of us that I think were written poorly. I think I'm going to go with a 1.75. So I think that's my rating. What about you?
Ooh, okay. I'll go in reverse order as well. I will obviously not be picking this second book up. And, it's pretty sad because that was partly what, got us thinking about choosing this title. You had seen that in just a matter of months, the second book is coming out, and we saw it as a great opportunity to get people excited. Maybe, of course, us getting excited, eventually reading the second book. So it is a bit of a disappointment, to say the least, because that was part of our thinking. We were anticipating maybe going on to book 2, and no, it will not happen. I'm always nosy, so I'm happy to learn and hear what happens in the next books. I feel like they'll always make me a bit mad, though. And so I'm like, I'm okay with not knowing anything. It's fine. And you took the best 2 characters of the book. I would add that I still liked Aphrodite. I enjoyed her as a character. She was fun. And she switched things up compared to because we actually, when you're thinking about the gods we got to know, she was probably one of the gods we got to know the most, even though we saw her 3 or 4 times compared to any of the others. So, there's that. But Cerberus is clearly the winner. He is great. And I know, my heart broke, especially when, he had to get hurt to be snapped out of it. And then him saying, oh, I'm sorry. I could sense that I was doing this. I just couldn't, and it was very sad. And so, yeah, those 2, including Karen, I think that they're probably the best characters. It's always weird when you never choose the main character as a great character. Interesting. And I think I'm with you as far as the rating goes. I was thinking of a flat 2, mainly because you know, those were my feelings at the end of the book. But actually coming and discussing this with you, I was a bit more riled up than I thought I was. I had a few more opinions, and I'm glad you brought up Felix. What the heck? Where this guy was mentioned so many times, and he literally never shows up. That has to be a new one. That's 100% a new thing because I've never seen that before in any other literature. This guy, anyway, and also the fact that Lyra kept referencing being a thief and thief ethics, and I'm like, you were a clerk. You're actually not even a thief. So I don't know why you're bringing up all of these strategies and stuff. Sit down. You literally were never a thief, but okay. So I think I'm with you. I think 1.75 sounds about right. I could be meaner. I could be nicer, which is, usually the way things go. But yeah, I think you've convinced me to do a 1.75. It's only a quarter lower, but I
It's
think
significant. It means something.
it does. It does. So on that kind of sad note, friends, we have concluded our third month for the season of genre blends, and it's been a mixed bag. We are really hoping that when it comes to our fourth book for the season, the final one, Hitchcock Hotel, that this is the winner that we've been waiting for, because we're due. We are due for a winner. Feel free to write in your own thoughts, your own reactions when it comes to the games gods play. Feel free to agree with us. Feel free to disagree with us. We'd love to hear your perspectives. And we really hope to see you next week as we discuss this next book, because we've got high hopes and it's going to be fun. So yeah, happy reading until then, and we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.